And there's Brent. Hey, Brent, how you doing?
What's going on?
Hey, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Hey
We're
Brent.
just going to start with introductions. We'll let Lexy go first, and over to you, Brent.
Okay. Nice to see you, Brent. So welcome everybody to our discussion on improving diversity across multiple dimensions at Trane Technologies. I so wish I could see you all in person. Anyway, I'm Lexy Martin. I'm a longtime researcher, and I now head research at Visier, the leader in people analytics. And one of the best things I get to do is to talk to our customers about how they use people analytics to improve their business and to help their people. And I've had the pleasure of talking to Brent over the years to explore some of his, what I think is pretty brilliant work, both in improving employee engagement and now about his work to improve diversity at Trane Technologies. So let me turn it over to you, Brent, and please introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Brent Louie. I'm basically a lifetime analyst. The majority of my career was spent doing business analytics and financial services. I always wanted to be in HR. I even did IO Psych undergrad, but then never had sort of like the gumption to go and get a PhD and such and such. So I spent 10 years doing business analytics, and then after graduating from grad school, my boss said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to go do that people analytics thing." And that sort of backdoored it into the space. So have been in HR for 5 or 6 years, and just love the content and love working with people like Lexy. I sort of read your articles that you put out, think they're brilliant. So just as big a fan as Lexy. We just kind of have this sort of like equal fondness for each other.
Yeah, totally equal fondness. So
Totally understandable.
you're too good, Al. So one of the things I do when I talk with our customers is kind of what I call an analytics path exploration. And it comes from, talking with our customers about their need to kind of not just see the breadth of what people analytics can do, but see how it can address specific challenges. So this analytics path approach is I start by asking, what's the challenge to your organization that actually drove you to adopt people analytics and to use it? And then how do you use it, and get as specific as possible? And then what are some of your insights? And then what are your actions that you then take, your results and your lessons learned? So that's what Brent and I are going to do today. So let's get started. So start by talking about the challenges that drove Trane Technologies to address diversity with people analytics.
Yeah, Trane Technologies is a little bit of context around who we are. We're a sustainability company. We're a 100-year-old / 1 year new company. We simultaneously we were part of Ingersoll Rand. We did a merge and separation at the same time earlier this year, and so we're not even 1 year old as a company, but we have over 100 years of history to back us up. So it's just this interesting place that we're at in our company's time. I'd say one of the things that we've committed to as we've launched our new company is really 2030 sustainability goals. And we do a lot in climate solutions. One of those goals, which is absolute, is really around carbon emission footprint. 40% of the carbon emissions come from buildings. We have most of our products are in that space. We also have products that you see trucks going down the road that are cooling their systems. We play in that space as well. But we've committed to reduce the carbon emissions for the world by a gigaton, which means nothing to you all. To us, it translates into the equivalent of Italy, France, and UK in terms of the amount of emissions those combined countries put off in a given year, and we're going to do that by 2030. So those are the types of things that we're moving to as a company. One of the other pillars that's paramount for us beyond sort of this carbon emission footprint is really around creating opportunity for all. And so we have 35,000 employees right now. And we want to make sure that those employees feel like they each have the opportunity to succeed within the company, that they can they can come to the company if they want to, that they can progress through the company, that they feel like it's a place where they feel like they belong and are included in a lot of these topics we talked about earlier today. So that's a bit around sort of our company and sort of some of the problems and why we're trying to address diversity and inclusion within this space. I think what's wrapped within that in terms of a unique challenge is that a lot of the employees that we have tend to be in groups that maybe are less diverse, right? And so you think about, as the example, the engineers that will actually create the capability and functionality and technology so that we can create products that dramatically reduce carbon emissions, because that's ultimately how we'll get there. Those typically are coming from groups that tend to be more male dominated. I went to engineering school myself, and it was very male dominated. And so how do you use data to help try to drive insights and concrete progression when you have some of these larger challenges in your way? And I think that's where our company has realized that we have to combine action and data and sort of all this work that that the framework that Lexy put out up front in order to address for us this diversity part of our sustainability commitments.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about this in the past. I guess what I'd love for the audience to hear about is the ways that you actually use analytics to drive a conversation within the organization to improve that diversity. And one of the things I hear our customers talking about is that they use it at every stage of the employee life cycle to attract employees, to develop them, to retain them. So maybe talk a bit about how you're using analytics for that.
Yeah, we pretty cleanly think of the diversity equation, which is whoever you're trying to attract in terms of the diverse candidate as the numerator divided by your employee base, right? And we think the sub-levers of that are exactly what you described. You have to bring in diverse, depending on whatever you're trying to drive towards in terms of diversity. You have to make sure that once they're there, they are developed and perform well. And some of our commitments have been really around some of our leadership commitments and how we want to have some parity in those positions. So with that in mind, we have things like promotion rates and performance in terms of how we see levers for driving that part of the diversity equation. And then we've talked about in the past, you have to retain employees that come in. And so I think that is exactly the right framework. So for us, we've started, I'll give you just a few examples and we can go deep on any of them if you'd like. But we've started with sort of this modeling of how do we actually use those three levers by sort of subsegments, by subgroups out through 2030. And so we've made this commitment and we got to get there somehow. And it's not just simply, increase 1% per year. We want to know what the ins and outs and the levers that exist within those three frameworks that you described will influence and how we will progress to sort of to meet those objectives. One of the interesting things that we saw recently was, it's not a linear line, right? And some of the assumptions that we're making, it's actually sort of this, it's a reverse hockey stick. You gain more traction up front and progression up front because there's such a disparity right now in terms of our current diversity versus if you got to something like gender parity or ethnic matching the areas that you represent in terms of diversity. For ethnic diversity, you see greater lift up front, and then that diminishes over time, because once you get to a place where you're at 45% diversity and you're trying to you're still hiring at 50%, progression gets smaller, right, over time. So, but we have to model that out to understand the nuances and say, is the progression to 2030 going to be linear, or is it going to look different? We also, use data to drive insights. We've talked a little about that around, are there key levers within each of that entire employee life cycle that matter? for us, if you take the the attrition example, as a whole, we generally see in our case, gender parity in terms of retention or attrition rates, right? But that's not true for the entire company, right? And there are some parts of some regions or some areas where you see higher attrition rates, not just for gender, but just overall. And so if you have one part of your company where you have low, let's say single digit type attrition, maybe their leverage to diversity is more in hiring or promotion. Where if you have another part of the company where they have higher attrition rates, maybe they can invest and get some of the yield by reducing that attrition rate or increasing retention rate. And so it matters. It's not just an aggregate number equation. It's fundamentally different based off of what's going on within each of the subgroups. And then the last thing I think that is important for us is really around sort of measuring progression and making sure that what is measured is ultimately what leaders can action on. And we think many of the leaders that we're equipping data with are very senior leaders or our most senior leaders, and when we build sort of our dashboards or our metrics, they have to be ultra simple, and they have to be sort of something that they can just immediately understand the insights within a click or two. It can't be this humongous dashboard where they have to peck and find. And so we spend a lot of time trying to create very simple, eloquent sort of dashboards that give them exactly what they need in a moment, and sort of bring forth insights so that it's not so hard for them to sort of drive really where they want to action on. But those are sort of some of the three ways that we might drive and use data to help diversity within Trane technologies.
So by the way, Al, if you've got questions, please feel free to ask too.
Okay.
But what are some of the insights that you have gotten? And I know it's a very kind of broad, it's across multiple dimensions that you're really looking at this. You have some very lofty goals, like to achieve gender equality by 2030. But and as you said, there's places where you may be doing great, places where you aren't doing as well. But talk a little bit about some of those insights that you've had as you've looked across the company, and how have you focused your attention on those insights?
Yeah, I'd say for us, I think our answer is going to be different than other people's answers to this. I think that's important context before I answer this question, right? So I'd say, for every listener out there, I think it is about sort of creating an ecosystem and the right tools and capabilities for you to find your own insights. I think Visier has helped us within that and allow us to sort of help gather some of those insights up front. I will give you sort of one example for us, right? And just I won't go deeper, only because I just don't think it matters, because it matters depending on sort of what group that you are, right? Like if you're not in an engineering group like ours, then our insights that we have don't matter towards you. But one of the things that we had seen, is when we look at just sort of we'll take the gender scenario for now, and we're doing a lot of work within U.S. ethnicity as well. But for the gender scenario, we actually found positivity in terms of when women come to our company, they tend to feel as included. Engagement is high. They actually tend to perform as well, get promoted faster in some places, stay as long. So all these things, this whole equation, are positive signs for us. It may not be true for every other company. And so in aggregate, that's our story. And so, if you look at those three levers, you're not going to get this ton of lift, or the juice is going to be hard to squeeze to really reduce an attrition rate even lower than what is already a pretty good attrition rate. And you can actually even go even further and say, well, then you might be retaining people that you might not want to retain. If you drop it to something like 0%, right? That's actually probably bad. And so for us, from our insight, we tend to spend a lot of our time focusing on bringing people into the company that are diverse, because that's where a lot of our leverage is. And then even with that, you have to sort of understand the nuances of the sub levers within the higher lever, right? And so for us, the recruiting funnel, which is sort of built right for us, we're able to pull that out. We can sort of see that it's less about things like diversity of slates, right? Because we actually see women progress through the funnel. If they get there, they progress at equal rates, if not faster. What it's really about is top of the funnel, right? And that's where all of our focus needs to be. And how do you create new sourcing channels and things like that, right? And so you have to have the ability to sort of drill down and understand what's unique to your organization, because there's literally dozens, if not hundreds, of sub levers that are different for every group out there, right? And for us, that's at an enterprise level, that's sort of one of our sub levers that we're really going after.
So, Lexy, you mind if I jump in real quick on this?
Of course.
Yeah. Well, first off, Brent, congratulations on the work that you're doing, because it's fantastic, and it's fantastic. Not just me saying that, knowing very little, but just the narrative that you're putting around it is very confidence inspiring, and it also invites a couple questions for me, because if you want, in any organization that wants to improve their diversity measures, almost without exception, they're reaching into pools that are not equitable themselves. In other words, there's not as many STEM Black women coming through as there are, white males, of course. So there are white males out there who would say, well, hey, I earned my stripes, and why am I getting passed up for someone who doesn't have the credentials, might be younger, whatever the case is. Sure. So that can get sticky. And so, but that's a conversation that needs to have if we're going to create a more equitable, just society over time. So my question is, who is having those conversations inside? Because there's ethical concerns, there's obviously cross-functional. It's not only talent acquisition, it's learning, it's comp, it's workforce planning if you have that. So who's in the room actually consuming the insights, and are they struggling with these dilemmas that I just outlined, or is it pretty much linear? Okay, we just want to improve it by X%, we'll just move forward.
No, I think you bring up a good point. I think society probably is wrestling with that a bit. At least the U.S. society is wrestling with that as a whole, as a concept. So I don't think it's a foreign concept. I think for us, the who, it's got to be the full company. I think for us, it starts with all the way up to our CEO and his leadership team, and making sure that they're having those conversations. I think it has to be really leader-led. It's not a people analytics has this insight and then we're going to go convince the world. It is very much, to Lexy's point, there's a problem that our leadership has already bought into, and they're looking for solutions to solve it. I do think it matters from there all the way down to sort of literally the frontline manager, or even people that are making hiring decisions. And maybe I might even say that we're sort of starting to relaunch some of our leadership principles. And we think about the world in terms of people leadership, less about sort of great managers. And so I have an employee in my team that she's not a manager, but I absolutely see her as a leader, right? And even her, I think she has a responsibility to create the right environment, to create the right context to help elevate some of those conversations. At the end of the day, we do believe, the way that we've been explicit is this is about creating an opportunity for all. Right, the all is very important, right? And we will absolutely always select the best talent no matter what. And so I think having that context does matter. You have to really truly believe in your heart of hearts that the end destination is an opportunity for all, and you have to have principles in place and the right systems to allow for you to make sure you select the right talent and you're making the right decisions. It's recruiters, it's hiring managers, it's your senior leadership, it's all of those people in the room. It's legal for sure. We talk regularly to groups like legal to make sure that we're doing the right things. And but yeah, I mean, it's a full conversation with lots of people, and I don't actually think you can make the progression unless you sort of have from top to bottom, everyone sort of bought in with that objective.
Yeah, Al, you've kind of gotten at what my next question is about, is, analytics is great. It can show you where you are and where you maybe have issues, but until you actually take action on that, it's hard to make progress. And so if you go back to your example of, having issues with getting people, Black minorities into the funnel, what are some of those actions that you've taken? And, maybe people analytics informed this, but, clearly there's something going on within your organization to actually make a change there. What's that about?
Yeah, I almost feel sort of like bashful at saying for like all of the work that actually occurs. Like I actually don't feel like we do contribute that much into actions in terms of progression, right? But there are so many sub actions that need to occur. Even this morning, I was in my team's town hall, and we happen to be sort of in the same organization as the recruiting organization, and they're just sort of putting up all of the individual stories that each one is doing to make progression, like individuals calling up and searching for unique talent that typically wouldn't have come to us, right? And the results are surprising, right? Like, are in a powerful way. Like they're pleasantly surprising. You said like these numbers are beautiful is what I typed into the chat this morning, because you see these unique wins. And for us, the numbers that were flashed really around sort of our new hires for our entry level, like college type employees, and just the diversity that's in there. Each one had an individual story that went with it, And so I'd say, for us, like those types of stories are really meaningful, and you have to make progression over time. I do think with any model, if you think about this diversity equation, it's a decade plus type journey, right? And each day you have to make progression, otherwise you'll never make it to the end, right? You're not taking and saying, we're going to grow by 5% of diversity in any given year. That's just unheard of, right? You're like gain 1% over a full year, but you can't do that unless you're doing the sub-level things correct. I think the full ecosystem matters, right? So you have to have, things like employee resource groups, which we have, some things that we do that are, courageous conversations. We have something like that's unique to us. I think other companies probably have different versions of this, but they're places where we have, difficult conversations where people can sort of share their opinion and feel safe, to voice those, and those types of things matter. I think one of the ones that, Lexy, to answer your question a little bit more directly, that you'd asked, particularly on sort of the recruiting experience, if that's a place of leverage for us, to Al's point, there, it's not abundant, right? And so we have to be creative about how we solve some of those in terms of the top of the funnel. The one that I'll sort of highlight would be we have a program called Relaunch, right? And I like it because it's really functional led, business led, right? It's really about the engineering community focusing on trying to bring gender diversity within the engineering organization. And they're specifically targeting women that have left the workforce and want to re-enter, right? And I actually I was thinking about this morning, I was like, this is my wife, right? So we have, we met at college. We have 3 children. We worked together at a prior company for a decade. And every year I'd come home and say, like, I got this rating, it's great. And she'd be like, oh, I got a better rating. I'd be like, hey, I might get promoted. She's like, well, I got promoted, and she, by all measures, is a better employee than myself, right? She chose, and it was, someone's always like, it's not your decision, it's her decision. She chose to step away from the workforce for a period as we've had our younger kids, right? Now, if you take that as the use case, right, like you want that type of talent. Any company wants that type of talent in the organization, right? But when you look at it on paper, it's going to look as if she's got this gap in experience, right? And by all measures, she should be further along in her career than I am, right? But it's not going to feel that way when she comes and talks to a recruiter. And so you need programs like Relaunch to sort of equip people like my wife, or like female engineers in our scenario that have chosen to intentionally step away, need to be re-equipped and have an opportunity to step into a place. And guess what? I think companies win if you get that, right? Like if my wife ever goes back, which she should maybe if she wants to, the company that gets her is going to win, right? Like she's absolutely a better employee than I am. Not that I'm a great employee, but like she's absolutely the type of employee that you want. And I think you have to have things like Relaunch. I just think it's a great program that we have within Trane Technologies.
It's interesting. We had come out with a report a number of years ago on gender equity and identified through data that there's this thing called the manager divide. And what happens is women leave the workforce, and then when they come back, they haven't had the experience, the opportunity to become a manager, so it's harder for them to progress. And what you're saying is that organizations actually should be looking for people who have left the workforce. And I'll bet you anything, speaking from my experience and my women friends' experience, our experience during those times that we've been out of the workforce is probably what organizations need today. So we should escalate those women when they come back into the workforce.
Absolutely.
So thanks for talking about some of those actions. I guess I want to take you next to what are some of the broad results that you have been able to achieve? And Al, how much time do we have? Because we've got a couple more things we want to cover.
Yeah, we can go 5 to 10 more. 10 more minutes.
Good. Okay, no problem. Go.
I'll be brief, and we can sort of go wherever you all want to go. I'd say I think for us again, these are long type, decade type things that you have to make progression on. For us though, it does matter if you look in isolation at some of the areas that you're trying to make progression on. If you keep doing that day in and day out, that's what matters. So one of the areas that we've been really focused on earlier on in our diversity journey was sort of gender growth within our mid-level and even senior level women. And so we've had a lot of focus in that area, more than like the things like the Relaunch program, got women's development programs, things like that. But since we really in the last 3 years, we've seen a 50% increase in sort of our manager and senior manager women that come into the workforce, right? So, and it's lots of these day-to-day interactions that cause that. It's recruiting strategies. It's having an inclusive workforce once they get here. It's equipping managers with unconscious bias training. All of those are requirements in order to make that type of progression. But that's sort of a one case where we've been overly focused on, and we've seen some really early powerful results from sort of that work.
One of the other things I'm kind of hearing through what you're talking about with all the individual actions that are happening is that you clearly have an inclusive environment. It's so clear to me these days that the subject of diversity and inclusion, diversity being the numbers, inclusion, are we participating? Can we make a difference? It seems like, you have embraced what I would say inclusion is everyone's responsibility. And, it seems very clear that at Trane and probably also Ingersoll Rand, that, that's a culture that you have. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a culture that we have. It's a culture we aspire to have. I think there's a spectrum, and you always want it to feel like everyone can succeed, right? And I think this equitable is also a part of it, right? There's lots of components to your point. I think diversity, to your point, is very hard. You can just almost count, right? Or use data to count. I think inclusion is more sort of subjective. How do people feel? And you can even there's things within that, and this equitable equation is kind of interesting, right? Because that's really, you could do things like promotion rates and determine that as the measurement for equity, right? That still may not translate to how people feel in terms of equity, right? And so that, I think that's an interesting dichotomy, right? Like you might have a world where you have promotion rates and performance rates that a certain group outperforms another group, but they may not feel it, maybe because they look up and they don't see the diversity that's in there, or maybe because they just don't feel it within the equation. And I think it's a more complex equation. I do think, to your point, Lexy, though, you have to have a culture that's in that, and you can't settle. You got to continue to make progress against that, because without sort of the culture that enables an equitable and inclusive environment, you actually won't be able to make success on the diversity part as well.
Yeah, this topic of inclusion, I know that inclusion is a lot about feeling, feeling included, feelings of belonging. And we measure it through sentiment analysis, through engagement surveys. But I think we can go beyond that to, measure participation, and, even to measure, like, what's the difference between the performance and the output of women versus males. Like, we can get more tangible, I think, and to show whether or not everybody is able to make a difference, not just feel that they're making a difference. They're just a point of view I have. Do you want to comment on that, either one of you?
I'll just say this as we start to wrap. I 100% agree, Lexy, and it's been a bit of an esoteric concept. I think the good news is inclusion is getting more tangible because the measures are getting better, the frequency in which the questions are being asked, even the qualitative data that's being collected is more frequent and deep. So
I just think we can do better there, Al.
What's that?
I'm working on it.
Well, and just, I'm reflecting as I'm listening to Brent's responses, and there's two things that are jumping to mind. I'm pretty sure that he's married to Lady Gaga, so that's you're obviously a rock star. So if she's a bigger rock star than you, I mean, that's where my head goes. So just,
I don't know if she said that. I'll give her that.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and this is a bigger conversation, and it can be summarized in a question about what's next for you. And I think you've touched on it. But I am really interested in how well-being crosses over with inclusion. We've touched on it a little bit because if your wife comes back,
Yep.
She can be expected to put in 50, 60, 70 hours a week when she's got 3 kids, running around. Is there going to be a true heightened level of empathy towards the stage of life people are in, whether they be taking care of kids or an elderly parent, because we've had pretty much a peanut butter approach based on age, based on role, based on these other factors, and that's alienated a lot of people, particularly people of color. So, I have hope, but it's going to take more creativity than we've employed historically, and that creativity is going to be rooted in the quality of the data that we produce and analyze. So, yeah, there's a compliment in there. So I'll just leave it at that.
I'll sort of end with one last response to that. I don't know if it's a compliment / question. I think you're absolutely you're onto something, right? This well-being. I think it's pretty clear in our data. It's clear in every data source that you're looking at. We'll say, I think women in particular in this scenario for the COVID environment have been more impacted. I also think you could make an argument, societally based off of industries and things like that, the certain ethnic groups have also been overly impacted. I'll take the gender angle for this scenario, just we're talking about Lady Gaga. I do think that matters, right? And one of the things that we're sort of looking at in trying to figure out, we don't have exact solutions yet in place, is some of the women in our workforce that have been most impacted are inverse to sort of what we'd have anticipated, right? And so, we've seen a lot of our more senior women having this, well-being, work-life balance as a higher pain point than some of, other women in our organization, right? And we don't exactly know why. We just know it is at this point. I can come up with reasons and theories. In the end, it really doesn't matter. We have to solve it, right? Especially when we've made some of these commitments up top, particularly at those women that we want to protect. And so, yeah, it's going to require a bunch of creative solutions, right? You have to think about performance management. You have to think about sort of work-life integration. You have to think about, sustainability, right, of this all, right? There's no longer this sort of, I'm just going to grit through it and get to summer, and just have my kids not be educated, right? Like, those are no longer sort of solutions. I'll give you one example and then I'll end. Like for us, we know that, schooling is important. So in my Lady Gaga scenario, right, our company has said we're going to help sponsor pods for you to be able to take your kids to, if you feel safe, to help with that schooling scenario, right? Like those types of things over and over and over again have to be part of the equation to solve the sort of well-being you're talking about.
Yeah.
I love watching what you do, Brent, and listening to who you are as a person, and so grateful you get to work within a company that that is so focused on right values. Al, I think we have maybe a couple of minutes. I just want to say a few things in conclusion here. This is a personal thing. I'm going to be 76 tomorrow, and I'm thinking about retiring again. So my time is a little short. And, I think we just need to do so much better about improving diversity and inclusion and equity. I am really proud of that Visier is being used by our customers to improve diversity. I think that data is really important in shining a light on where we are, setting a baseline, enabling organizations like yours to actually make a difference. But I think we need to do better. I have a couple of offers for the community. One is that if you'd like to see how you stack up on your diversity maturity, particularly your data-driven diversity maturity, we have a strategy assessment so you can see where you are on your journey and see the steps that you might take next. And then also, this year has done something new recently. I'm not even sure you know about this, Al. It's the People Intelligence Alliance to connect to the wisdom of many and make people count. And we have over 50 organizations and individuals that have already taken the pledge to put people at the heart of our work and to eradicate bias and make people count. And it's specifically focused on connecting information seamlessly across applications in support, of better decisions like decisions around D&I. And truly, there's no better place than to connect the wealth of information to improve diversity and inclusion. You've talked about it, there's intersections with well-being, with engagement, with, pay equity, et cetera. So please take a look at the People Intelligence Alliance that we have front and center on the Visier.com website. And thanks.
Well, thank you, Lexy, for all you are doing and have done. And yeah, I'm familiar with the People Intelligence Line. I put my hand on the book right before HR Tech on that. So yeah,
high five to you.
I'm on board, and yeah, we'll be sure to share those links and amplify that. So, thanks to you both. You're both awesome, Brent. Thanks for sharing, Lexy. Thanks for being your awesome self as well, and you all be well. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Al. You take care.
See you, Lexy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.